Hello, so it is Sunday evening, about a little after 7 o'clock, and I am just out and about. And I did a recording earlier, and this has happened a few times, where I make something, and sometimes my words are very harsh, and I end up having to re record. One of the things that I've come to understand is just kind of being around a lot of toxicity and ugly people have taught me to behave ugly myself. And to me, it seems like a normal way to behave, especially if I'm trying to stand up for myself or defend myself. I can have a sharp tongue. I know that. And I didn't really think of it as being toxic, but it is. And I was told that I would need to relearn as I heal how to treat others and treat myself, and how to talk and behave, and I have a lot to learn. But one of the things I was thinking about earlier on was how I was able to take my daughter to the dentist. She had a cavity to fill, and she was a little terrified of the Novocaine, that she was going to have to get that shot. She was scared. And I was happy to take that time off of work and go in with her and hold her hand and be supportive and get her through and get her to a great dentist who was also very soothing and helpful to her. And it was something positive. When she walked away, she said, it wasn't nearly as bad as I had made it out to be in my mind. And I was so happy and felt so blessed that I could be there for her and help her through. And she felt supported, and she faced a fear, and she faced her anxiety, and it was such a great thing. I compared that to when I was younger. When I was a little kid, I was terrified of the dentist. Terrified. I mean, I remember screaming, I remember crying, I remember the fear. It was not a fun time, and I did not have supportive parents in that area. In fact, one of the times they dropped me off at the dentist, and I was not more than 7 or 8 years old, and they dropped me off, and I was supposed to go into the dentist alone, and I didn't have the support, and face the appointment, and then when we were through, I was told to walk home. And the walk home, I mean, I would love to clock it today, because when I think of that distance, I think I was walking at least a couple of miles home. That was a terrifying experience for me, and I didn't have the support that I needed, and just it seemed to make everything even worse than what I initially felt, and it was a terrifying experience. And I think of today, if I'd have dropped my kids off at the dentist, first off, I would not do that. Second off, I would never let them walk home. The area that we lived in, it wasn't terrible, but I wouldn't call it super safe either. And anything terrible can happen to anyone anywhere. And I was lucky that nothing happened. All those times I walked everywhere. And I'm surprised my parents let me just kind of go wherever I wanted to go when I was a kid. I would never let my kids do that today. I would not consider it safe. But that was just a comparison between their childhood and my childhood. I say their, I mean my kids. And I'm happy I've made it better for them. When I was a kid, I had a half-brother that was 7 years older than I was. And he had a real chip on his shoulder that he had a younger sister. And I'm told, or was told later, that he had been given a lot of responsibility, and he kind of took some responsibility upon himself just because he was just so embarrassed, for instance, about how messy our house was, so he would clean it every day. He was expected to take care of me after school until our parents came home. And I mean, that was a parental role for him, and there was so much animosity towards me. It wasn't a good idea. It wasn't smart, and I would never put one kid in a parental role over another kid, like if they're siblings. I vowed I would never do that. And I didn't care how much it cost. I would hire care in so that my kids could be true siblings and one didn't have to take on too much responsibility or parental role or feel like they were in charge of the other. I know that there are some cases where, families rely on that, and maybe it works, but in my case, it was my brother was very abusive towards me. Those are stories in and of their own, but it was terribly abusive, and had anyone found out, one or both of us probably would have been removed from the home for our own safety. And I grew up thinking it was normal. I didn't know it was abusive. I thought everyone kind of went through that, and that's just the way people were. I remember roaming the neighborhood when he was watching me, just pretty much looking for anywhere else to go but home. I didn't want to be around him, and so I made a lot of friends and went to people's homes and houses, and I played outside, and I avoided being home, but the times that I was home and he was watching me weren't very nice at all. But it's interesting. Before I was a parent, I thought having kids would be kind of easy. But when I had them, I realized what a monumental task it was going to be, because I had never loved anything so much in my life as I did my kids. And I didn't even know you could love somebody that much when I had my kids. Both of them I would do anything for, and I wanted to, help them experience everything good in life, everything that life had to offer. I wanted them to feel achievement and success, and I wanted to help them and wanted to keep them out of trouble. When you have those kind of feelings for your kids and you just love them, as I think a majority of parents do, you want what's best for them. And I never thought of my childhood as particularly terrible, but when I do things with my kids and I recognize there was quite a bit that my parents did not do with me, I get sad. And in that healing process, I sometimes wonder if that's as tough, if not tougher, than the actual kind of abuse itself. I recognize what little effort my parents put into some of my situations, but then again, I will also credit them because and I don't know if this is true. I think it's true, because part of me thinks they actually didn't love me. But part of me thinks that if they did, some of that neglect there and abuse was because that's all they knew when they were growing up. And I'm so sorry if they lived in that kind of pain. That generational thing again, that happens. Then I got to thinking about kind of that COVID era I've talked about earlier, where I was fired from my previous job, and how my previous boss, Andy, just kind of turned into a different person all of a sudden. And that's when I knew, just for no reason, things changed, and it wasn't much longer until I was fired. And that was frustrating, but also a blessing. And came home and saw that my kids were in a real bind. And I'm going to talk about this piece. I haven't talked about it before because it's not easy, but I'm going to talk about it now because I think it's going to help me. And I also think that kids need a voice and they need an advocate. And at the same time, I want to protect their privacy. But, we don't heal by staying silent. And so I'm going to talk about this carefully. When I started paying attention and I wasn't working 80 hours plus a week, I noticed during COVID, we got our kids iPads so that they could reach out to school friends and play games and keep in touch at least that way. And then I think my husband back then at least had a laptop that they were using, and that was the extent of our electronics. And I realized, because we weren't checking their iPads or their accounts or what they were doing, I wasn't nearly as much as I should have. And when I did, I found some really disturbing things. I saw that they would write down like little riddles that they would need to figure out. And if they figured out a riddle, they would put the answer somewhere online and it would open something for them, like it was password protected, or it'd bring them into a chat room. And the people that they were talking to had code names. Like, for instance, they would name themselves after a Harry Potter character, and they would refer to the kids as a Harry Potter character as well. And I saw that my kids were sent some really inappropriate pictures and media that were like cartoons with sexual references and just really mean names towards women. And it was horrifying to find. And I also learned that my daughter, and when I say daughter, I'm going to say both, but especially my older daughter, had somehow learned how to clean up after herself. Like, for instance, she learned how to clear the cache in Chrome so that you couldn't necessarily find her history. And she wasn't very old. I'm trying to think of how old she'd be. Maybe 9? I'd have to think about that, but she knew how to clear the cache in Chrome, and I didn't show her. And her dad, so far as I know, didn't show her, or at least he said, who knows? He may have, but he says he didn't. She knew how to go in under an incognito mode. She knew far too much about how to hide online than she should have, because what she was hiding was, or taught to hide, was some of the things she was being sent and some of the people she was talking to. I feel that this group were teaching kids to do things like they were playing games. Like, I heard my kids refer to, they were talking to each other once, and they said, well, the only time you can't control anything you do because it's not in your control is if, you're doing A, B, and C. And it was like a sequence of movements or something like that. And then it was like, if you're told to do something, then you can't disobey. Or it was something along those lines where they were told to do something and they were not allowed to disobey. And it was out of their control. It was like scary stuff like that. And they were drawing things. They were drawing disturbing pictures. They were drawing pictures of eyes. And they were drawing, it was like, I'm not sure where all of that came from, but when I saw this, I took away their electronics for their safety. And I was very worried. And when I think back to it, I've mentioned I can't tell the difference between Ben's energy and Matt's energy. And Matt is my ex-husband, and Ben is the person that I had an affair with at work. And I really think Ben was involved I think he's involved in a cult. I'll say it. And I don't think he's the top guy in the cult, but I think he's he's a right-hand man. I think he's high up there, and I think he's done some really bad things. And that's what I think now, but at the time I didn't know. And I wonder if he had me so busy, in part, to attack my kids when I wasn't looking. That's kind of what I'm gathering intuitively. But, certainly not with my senses. I don't have any proof of that. That is what I speculate, and it terrifies me. And I didn't know if my husband was involved. That was another thing. He was the only man that was around them during that time. And I was worried that he could be attacking the kids. And that had me scared. And I don't know. I called the police more than a couple of times. I called Child Protective Services to kind of talk to them about some things that I had observed. I made police reports. I reported what had happened at work with, the phone messages, texts, videos, whatever, being exchanged between Ben and Andy and my husband, Matt. And, I tried to initiate any kind of action upon this situation that I could, and it hit a dead wall. And now, intuitively, I can tell you that it hit a wall because the officer that was supposed to be handling it and investigating it was bribed to drop it. And I don't believe he was bribed to drop it with money. I think he was bribed to drop it when he was offered a prostitute. I think there was an exchange, and it didn't get properly investigated, and it hit a wall. But I will tell you, at that time, I had 2 very unhappy kids that I was awfully worried about. They could barely get out of bed. They could barely take care of themselves. They didn't have much of a will to live. And they were acting as if they'd have been attacked themselves. And I was very scared. And I kept him with me every second. And because I was seeing this, anything that happened at work, I no longer cared about. I mean, I cared about it, but that was not where my energy was going. My energy was going to getting my kids to safety. And I did. And they weren't very happy about it, because we left the house, and the friends that they were talking to, they could no longer talk to, and the games that they were playing to get by during COVID, they could never play again. They were unhappy, and they were sad, and they were depressed, and they were angry, and there was just a myriad of emotions that they were experiencing. And I was thankful that I was there. And, I remember during that time we had 2 hamsters and a dog. And the dog's name was Rex. And um, I've always had cats, but I knew if we got a dog, the kids wanted a dog, and we got the dog because the kids wanted a dog so bad. But ultimately, like so many other households, I'm sure, the parents end up taking care of the dog. And that dog I grew to love, and he was important to me, and I just was crazy about him. And I recognized one time when my then husband came home, and I was talking to him about everything, trying to sort out what happened, trying to figure out anything, putting together all these things that didn't make sense and who was involved and who wasn't. And I'm talking to him about some things, and his story changed. I mean, he would tell me one thing, and then he would tell me an entirely different story, and then he'd tell me, well, I made that up, it wasn't true. But then, it was like I just couldn't get a straight story out of him. And I really didn't know how he was involved, or if at all. But of course, I suspected he was involved. And if my kids are potentially hurting, then absolutely I'm not going to leave them alone around anybody until I find out, what's going on with them. But he and I were arguing, and I could sense his anger, like it was explosive. But he kept very calm, but his demeanor was, it was so scary. I looked at him and I said, "Are you going to hurt me?" And he looked at me and said, "No." He was shocked. And we continued on. But I went to look for Rex, and for the first time ever, he had gone outside to hide. He hid as soon as he felt my husband and that anger. He absolutely went to go hide. He was scared. And some other things I had noticed about Rex was that when he would sleep, and this didn't happen when we first got him, it had happened when everything else had gone down. Rex started behaving as if he had been attacked, as if he'd been abused. When he would sleep, his body would start convulsing, and it was like he was heaving, and he's like whimpering, and he was having a nightmare, and he was traumatized about something, and this wasn't just once, this was many times. And in the way that I knew everything else, I knew that he had been attacked. When I was up in the bedroom and I was drugged, he would sleep at my feet. And when anyone came in to try and hurt me, he would stay on my feet, so they couldn't get to me. And of course, they removed him, but somebody hurt him, and he was hurt trying to protect me. And I could not let that dog, I had to protect him. I took him, and anywhere me and my kids went, the dog went too. And there's not a lot of places you can take a dog. So, we were at parks, and wherever we went, the dog was there. And that made things pretty difficult. and especially when you don't have a home. In the last place, I wanted to take Rex. I mean, if that was my last choice and I had to, I would take him back to the shelter, but that dog did not deserve to go back to the shelter. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to leave him alone any more than I was going to leave my kids alone until I figured out what was going on. During that time, the kids were just starting back to school, like part-time. So half the time they were working remotely from home, and then they'd go into school a couple of times a week. And Anna went in, and she talked to her counselor. And Anna is my oldest. She went in and talked to the school counselor. And I don't know what she said to the counselor, but I do know at that time I could not leave those two alone. The second they could, they would try to signal somebody to help them. Anything they could do to get away from me, because, well, I was the bad guy in their eyes. I had taken away their electronics. I had taken away the one thing that they needed. I had taken away their friends. And, of course, that I didn't want to do that, but I had to keep them safe. And I was definitely the bad guy for that. And I'm sure she went in and talked to the counselor and said probably some negative things about me. But she also said she was worried about her dog, and that our dog didn't have anywhere to go. And this counselor, and I'm going to call her what the kids at school called her, Miss S, called me and offered to watch Rex. And I have never been so grateful in my life. I brought Rex to her, and she absolutely fell in love with Rex, and so did her family, to the point that they wanted to adopt Rex. They did not want to give Rex back. And I was grateful that he had found a home, and he was in a safe place, and that nobody was going to try and attack him or try and kill him, because that was what I was getting. There was an attempt to get rid of my dog and to murder him, and that was all in an attempt to hurt me. They were going to hurt my animals, they were going to hurt my kids, they were going to take my job. My marriage was ruined. Everything was sabotaged. My entire life was turned upside down, and there was like not one piece that was left unturned. But Rex made it to a safe place, and he's there today, and that was very difficult to give that dog up, but I did it in his best interest and for his safety. And to this day, my kids, that was very difficult for them. Their lives were turned upside down as well. Their parents were divorced. They lost their home. They lost their pets. They lost their electronics. They lost their friends. My kids were hurt in every way, as was I. And that was a very difficult time. I called a lot of people when all of that was going on. As I said, I called and reported it to the police. I called CPS. I ultimately reached out to counselors. for my kids, and I could not find anyone that was taking any kind of action. I reached out to doctors. I reached out to anybody, and I just couldn't find anyone that was sensing what I was sensing, except for one person, and that was Miss S. And she knew something was wrong. She just could not pinpoint what it was. And I mean, that's exactly the place that I was in at that time. I mean, I knew things. I probably, I knew more than anybody else of what was going on. I didn't have the facts or any evidence to back it up. It was coming to me intuitively, and there wasn't much I could do except kind of pick up the pieces and help my kids on my own and get them to a better, safer, happier place and protect myself. And Mrs. S, or Miss S, she could sense that something was terribly wrong. Now, the only thing she did wrong was she made conclusions about what was wrong, and she tried to fix it in an unconventional way. And when I say unconventional, she called me one day and she said, "Listen, I'm going to try and get you some help." See, she thought that I was the one that was breaking down. She thought that maybe I was unstable. And she said, now sometimes, when you report this stuff, it just doesn't get heard. But I'm going to try and get you some help. And, I didn't know in what context she was talking about at the time, but I was like, thank you, and that's fine. Before I knew it, what had happened was she called and reported the incident. I believe she initially called the police department, and I don't know this for sure. But when no action was taken, CPS was called, and a report was filed. And she told me she was going to call them. Though somebody else could have called them as well, but I think it was her. But I think that the report that she filed was, I don't want to call it lies, but it was maybe embellished to bring some action, like to bring some attention or highlight this issue and have somebody look over it again and recognize it and figure out what was going on. But that's what I suspect happened. I've never asked what the allegations were because I don't want to know. I don't want to look into it. I don't want to know what it was about. It's irrelevant at this point. All I know is that she was sensing that something was wrong and she was trying to bring some attention to it. It just wasn't done in the right way, and her conclusions were incorrect. Her instinct was correct, her conclusions about what it was were incorrect. And somebody came to the schools and checked my kids for bruises, things like that. And that was, I mean, obviously there was nothing found. It was unfounded. Um, and all of the sudden, she wasn't working as a school counselor anymore. And I was very sad to see that because she was so good. And I was not, how do you call it? Like, I wasn't bitter that she called and reported anything. And I wasn't bitter that she had embellished possibly anything in order to get some action. She did her best. She just didn't go through, the correct lines, the correct, I don't know, the correct process, I guess. But her intentions were good. Her intentions were pure, and she was trying to help, and I will forever be grateful for that. I also had another friend named Janet, and I'll call her a friend, but really she was like an acquaintance. And I had met her a few years earlier, and I had my kids at the hospital, and the dog was in the parking lot, and I had the back trunk open, and I had him leashed, but he had fresh air, and the hospital said, "Hey, you've got to have somebody pick up your dog." And I said, "Gosh, I don't have anywhere. I don't have anywhere to drop him off, and I don't have anywhere to take him, and I have to stay here with my kids. I don't know what else to do." And they said, "Well, you've got to call somebody because you can't keep the dog in the parking lot, with the back trunk open." So I called this friend Janet, and we hadn't talked for a couple of years, and we were never really friends in the first place. I mean, she did some very nice things for me. She helped my kids with presents one year when we were low on money. Well, I thought that was just so generous, since I met her at a church, and when I called her out of the blue, I had to ask her, could you please come pick up my dog? I know I haven't talked to you for a while. I know we don't know each other, but I have nobody else to call, and I need some help. And she helped me, and I was very grateful. She came out and picked up my dog. I stayed at her house for a couple of nights, but ultimately, I just think she didn't know what to make of the situation either, and it was just so much for her. That didn't work out either. I had a previous employee when I was the call center team lead, and I called her at one point when we didn't have a place to stay really, and I had to get my kids a bath, and I had to wash their clothes somewhere, and I asked her if I could borrow her bathroom and her washing machine. And I mean, literally, I had nothing. I had no friends to call. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any money. I mean, really, I was just out there, and I was really trying to avoid not going to my abusive mother's home. But ultimately, that's where I landed anyway. But those are 3 people during that time that I will never forget. And I appreciate them trying, even if some of the means were incorrect. They all had big hearts and good intentions, and they tried to do what they thought was best. And I will forever be grateful for that, because not very many others were around. Another person that I will forever be grateful to was an employee that I had. His name was Rob, and he worked in the call center. And I still keep in contact with him today, and he was amazing. I didn't tell anybody my situation. I mean, I had to tell my coworker, or back then, I guess my employee, Mindy, what was going on, but I had asked her not to say anything. I never mentioned anything to Rob, but one year when I had no money to give my kids any gifts, He didn't know what was going on, and as far as I know, he out of the blue sent me some money and a Christmas card and said, "Hey, Merry Christmas." And he gave me this money, and I was like, I mean, that was a very, very big thing. I will never forget, because it allowed me to buy a couple more things as gifts for my kids that year, that I was staying with my mother. And that meant the world to me. Those are people and actions and behaviors that I will never forget. So if you ever wonder if you should do something for somebody, or if it would look weird, or they might think you're weird, if it is an act of service or an act of kindness, please help, because you never know what somebody's going through, and you may not ever understand, but that can change people's lives. I don't know. I guess the last thing I'll say about that time frame was, when my kids were in that kind of state, I was absolutely, there was no way I could go back to work. I guess I should say I was lucky to have been able to go to my mother's during that time, because it allowed me to focus 100% of my time and energy on my children. Although she offered her home, but she would not offer anything else. She wasn't going to offer very much by means of a Christmas gift. She did offer something nice for a Christmas gift for them, but just very little. She wasn't going to pay for our food. In fact, she hassled me every time I brought groceries into the house. It was a difficult time, but I was grateful to spend that time with my kids and help them get their emotions out and their feelings, and we kind of get back to a safe place where everyone's feeling safe, and we talk things through and we stick together, and I just work and work and work with them until they started to feel a little bit better and things started to get a little bit easier and not quite so chaotic. I got them back into a schedule, and they would go to school, and I would drop them off and then come pick them up, and we would take our weekend trips, and we would go to the dollar store, we would go to the park, or we would go for a drive, just anything that cost as little money as possible, just not having much at that time. And them being so young, that was like some things that helped soothe them over and bring them to a better place, and gave me a chance to reconnect and let them know how much I love them. So that was a blessing. I think that's about all I have to say for the time being. Okay, have a good one.